Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Manchester's Library Theatre Company is currently without a permanent performance home since it left the Manchester Central Library and will not be taking up its new joint home with Cornerhouse Cinema until 2014. But it's taking advantage of its short-term residency at the Lowry in Salford with a large-scale revival of Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children in an adaptation by Tony Kushner. The title role will be played by Eve Polycarpou, and I asked her whether she found taking on a role as big and as famous as Mother Courage a little bit daunting.
Extremely daunting, absolutely. Before I was offered this part, before I, went up for the audition even, I didn't know the play. I knew of it, but I'd never seen it or read it. And I'm so glad, to be honest, because if I had, I think I would have been really frightened, especially when I found out the kind of people that have played this part. I mean, it's amazing, some wonderful, wonderful actresses who I absolutely adore and respect. So
starting with the playwright's wife, of course.
Absolutely, yeah, and what's her name again? Helena Weigel. Yes. Helena Weigel, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I did a couple of Brecht things years ago. I did Threepenny Opera at the National and played Jenny Diver opposite Tim Curry, and that was an amazing experience. And got to sing amazing songs like Solomon's Song and Pirate Jenny. Well, Pirate Jenny was actually sung by another actress, but that was an incredible experience. So I kind of I wasn't sure whether they were going to be using any of the original score. And then when I met Greg at the audition and then found out that actually the music was all going to be original, I was really excited because I thought, well, because I do love Kurt Weill and Hans Eisler, and I hadn't heard the original to this, so I was really kind of thrilled that it was going to be sort of like a modern version of it, if you like, composition-wise. And so far, I mean, the music I just think is phenomenal. I think he's such a great writer.
So how do you approach a role like this? Does the fact that it's Brecht affect how you approach the role, do you think?
I try not to let things like that get to me too much, David, because what I do love about the way that Brecht writes is that it's written, if you like, it's people's theatre. And you can just imagine people getting up and just doing this piece, talking, telling their story from their hearts, if you like. And I kind of feel that's the feeling I get about Brecht. And so I really like the way Chris is directing it because the musicians, you're seeing the musicians who are also actors coming onto the stage and then going back and then playing this incredible music and then coming on stage and doing this wonderful acting. And I love that. I love that mixture. So, so that to me I feel is Brecht. And that's because I'm a singer as well. It's so kind of fits in with my love of performance, if you like.
It's a different approach to, say, doing a musical. The music fits in a slightly different way, doesn't it?
Completely different. And I've never really done a musical as such. I mean, I've done plays with music, i.e. Threepenny Opera, Happy End, other Brecht things. But I've never done this kind of I've never done musical theatre, i.e. I've never done Les Miserables or anything like that. My brother's done that kind of stuff. And he's wonderful. So I kind of like that in a way. I mean, if I was offered something wonderful, then that would be amazing, of course. But I enjoy the mixture. I enjoy the fact that actually the way that you sing a song in this kind of a production in particular is that you're sort of commenting on the piece and the period. It's like another story, if you like. And if you like, it breaks down that fourth wall between you and the audience.
Now, it's sort of like an ensemble piece in many ways, except for your character. You've got to sort of have an oversight of the whole thing. It's quite a demanding role. There's a lot to learn, isn't there?
massive amount to learn. I've never learned so much in my bloody life. Sorry, you can skip one of those words. Life will do. Anyway, so I haven't. Yeah, I mean, it is massive, and I was up here in Manchester a couple of years running, doing 2 wonderful pieces. One of them was Agava in the Bacchae, and that was an incredible role, but she doesn't come on until sort of somewhere around 15 minutes towards the end of the end of the piece, and she comes on and she's kind of completely hysterical, so her energy has to be right up there, massive energy, because she thinks she's done this enormous feat. So you have to kind of wait all the way through the piece, and then you have to come in with that energy. So that has a kind of a demand in itself, but obviously it doesn't have the length of it. I don't have to learn as many words by any means. And then the other character I played, which was a character called Nearjus, in a wonderful piece by Judith Thompson at the Royal Exchange, again with Greg Hersoff directing, and that was the character I played had a monologue, so I was on stage for just under 40 minutes on my own, talking and talking and talking, and so that was, I thought at the time, oh my God, look at all these pages I've got to learn, and I've just got to keep going. And I thought I'd never ever play anything that demanded as much of me as that did. But Mother Courage is even more so, because it's not just the learning of the words and everything. Because you're interacting, it's not just one story in itself, if you like. There are so many different stories going on, and different layers to her. And so it's not only learning lines; it's also learning the different kind of her journey, her actual physical and emotional and mental journey, and it's quite massive, yeah.
Brecht is thought by a lot of people to, he sort of brought it on himself, but a lot of people think that he avoids emotion, but there is quite a lot of emotion towards the end of this play, isn't there?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Emotion that you've got to try and separate yourself from, your character, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what happens to her children one by one, it's pretty enormous. And, I mean, there's a lot of undertones of humour, as we know, and you might have heard earlier on in the sketch and everything, the bit that we did from the play. And that kind of, if you like, keeps her going. It's like, for her, it's a bit of her life source, really, the way that she just kind of puts humour on everything. But as far as the intense emotions are concerned, and the grief and the tragedy that she also goes through, I mean, it's a massive journey, and being able to access that is another huge challenge, really.
But she doesn't display it. She has to just pick up the cart and move on, doesn't she?
There's a kind of you kind of see elements of what goes on underneath. But yes, there is this one wonderful survivor. But you might not call it wonderful. You might think, oh God, what a heartless person. But actually, I think she's full of heart. But she doesn't want to wear it on her sleeve.
I mentioned the cart there. The cart is the iconic piece of set from Mother Courage. You've got to have the cart. So how are you coping with dragging a cart around?
Well, I walk the dogs, and and I have done a lot of swimming, although not much since I've been up here. But I'm staying with some really dear friends who've got 2 schnauzers, and called John and David, and I love their dogs, so I walk them whenever I can, and I walk my own dog at home. That's kind of, I have to be a bit fitter than I probably should be, than I probably am actually, but fortunately I get a bit of help from my kids, so that's quite useful.
Feed a war you have to pillage, but let your soldiers rest a bit, for what they need is Mother Courage, with woolen coats and boots that fit, their heads ablaze with lice and liquor, soldiers sure to turn and run. Feed them some grub from Mother Courage, so you'll know where the point is gone.
Greg Palmer is the musical director and the composer of the new original music for this production of Mother Courage, and I asked him, how do you approach writing new music for Brecht?
Well, it starts with talking to the director and what his vision for the play is, and as I said earlier, Chris's idea was that although Brecht was writing about the 30 Years' War, which was in the 17th century, the idea is that actually all of the things that we see in the play could have happened at any time and are probably happening even today, because there are wars going on around various parts of the globe. So rather than try to place the music in any specific time or place, I decided to go for the eclectic approach. So consequently, we have some tango, we have a bit of country and western, we have some Eastern European Balkan rhythm, we have some kind of quasi-militaristic stuff, which is sort of influenced by the kind of things that Kurt Weill wrote in collaboration with Brecht. I've done 2 or 3 of those productions previously, and I think they've just hung around in my head. It was kind of difficult to get away from that, really.
The excerpt that we heard before, the music that we heard before, I thought there is something a bit Brecht and Weill about it.
Yeah. No, I just couldn't get away from it, really. Try as hard as I could. I think there's a kind of a harshness about Mother Courage and her approach to life. She's got these 3 children she's desperately trying to protect, but at the same time she needs to stay close to the war, stay close to the front line so that she can make some money to keep herself and her children. And that's a pretty tough life for anybody, I think. And I wanted the music to try and evoke that. And it's for the audience to decide whether we've succeeded or not.
But the songs aren't incorporated emotionally into the plot like in a musical, are they? They do stand apart to comment on the action. So does that influence the style of them at all?
Well, yes, I suppose it does. You're right. Obviously, that we kind of, between the songs, quite often between the scenes, the songs quite often sit there in this space, and I suppose there's this idea that we invite the audience to stop and listen to these songs that are commenting on what's happened or what's just about to happen. So it's quite a tall order to try and make that work, and I don't know whether we've succeeded. I hope we have.
And you've got a cast of actor musicians. Is that a challenge to orchestrate it and to get them all together and to coordinate with the director?
Well, it is, although it's a style of theatre that I've done an awful lot of over the years. I've worked with 3 or 4 of the people in this cast previously, so I know what their skill set is, and actually that's it's a bonus for me, because it means that I know what I'm writing for, and in the rehearsal room ideas can bounce backwards and forwards between myself and them, and obviously the director as well. So it's like having it's like an artist, I suppose, having a paint pot with various colours at his disposal, and that's what the actors who play instruments are like for me in the rehearsal room.
And the main character, Mother Courage, do you have to have any special considerations for, apart from obviously the voice of the actor? She's got a lot to do, and she's got a lot of songs to sing. Do you have to take that into consideration as well?
Well, yes, I do. It's there's no getting away from the fact that she's got a huge task ahead of her. A huge amount of text to learn and songs too. And I just have to try and coax her through these things and put an arm around her shoulder when she can't quite remember the lyrics, and say it's going to be all right on the night, because it will be. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's a lot of stuff to learn. I wouldn't want to do it myself.
Unless his belly's full of porridge, a soldier sure to turn and run. By instant grip from Mother Courage, so in the way to point his gun. They fight for God and legal tender. I'll see them clothed and feed them well, and bless the boys in all their splendor as they march down the road to hell.
The Library Theatre Company's artistic director, Chris Hohner, has directed several Brecht productions in his time at the library, and so I asked him whether he'd been saving Mother Courage up for a particular moment.
Well, I've actually been very keen to do this play for quite some time, but I never felt, when we were at the library in that wonderfully intimate basement, that the stage was really capacious enough to take the play. Because, as you know, the story involves a woman and her kids who have a business where they sell stuff out of a cart. And you've got to have a certain amount of space to take the cart round the stage. The cart has to be in a landscape. And now that we're playing at the Lowry and the Quays Theatre from time to time, that gives us the kind of facilities that really we need, the minimum facilities that we need to present the play, I felt. So I'm delighted now at last we're able to do it. And of course, sadly, it's a play set in a war, and there always seems to be some kind of conflict going on in the world in which there is a lot of people suffering. It's always resonant, it seems to me, the play. So, yes, I'm delighted that we're at last able to produce it.
So how do you approach a play like this? Do you take any notice of anything that Brecht himself has said, or do you just take your own approach, just like with any other script?
Well, I think it's sensible to take notice of what Brecht said, because he was a really good director. And there are things that he understands about his plays that it's very good to take notice of. However, he would be the first to say, I think, and I think he has said he did say on a number of occasions, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So if what you see in the rehearsal room isn't working, then you should change it and try something else. And he himself is very generous in his comments about the contribution which his own actors, for instance, made to productions and the plays and so on. So, yeah, I think it's sensible. I think it's foolish to ignore what he says, but ultimately you've got to make sure it works for you and the other people that are working on the show.
Well, he wasn't always that generous about crediting people from where his work came from, but he did produce his model books, which he said were models for future productions. Have you taken any notice of any of that?
Well, actually, I've looked at his notes on producing Mother Courage, but I haven't looked at the model book, because I felt that might be almost... Because actually, I think the model book consists of photographs of almost every stage of the production, every bits, almost like every 30 seconds of the production. And I thought that would be perhaps too influential, and that we would be trying to copy that rather than find our own images for the story.
And what about the rehearsal process? Do you have he had a very detailed rehearsal process that he went through. Obviously, you don't have quite the rehearsal period that he had, but does that influence the way you work on his text?
He's got a very distinct style, I think, as a playwright. In some ways, I think that you approach it just as you would any other play, or I do, which is what does this character want? What's preventing this character from getting what they want? But he's very interesting when it comes to emotion, because he clearly doesn't want the actor to take an obviously emotional approach, which doesn't mean he doesn't want an audience to be moved, but he says at one point, nothing is as engaging on stage as watching someone trying to get a knot out of their shoelace. And by which he means, I think, that there's nothing so interesting as watching people try to sort out and get to and solve difficult problems. Usually in this play, difficult problems of survival. So you have to make crystal clear the actual story, so that you understand what dreadful pressures are on these people at any one time. Having said that, the play, it might seem that the play is very dark, and indeed it has very dark themes, but the play is shot through with humour. His own appreciation of people often in situations is very humorous in a rather dry way, it seems to me. And it's crucial that you pay attention to that, because otherwise the audience might have a rather dull time.
his relationship with emotion and humour is quite interesting, because a lot of people think he's very dry and that he doesn't want any kind of emotion in his plays. But I think this play, more than any other, there's a lot of emotion at the end of this play. So how do you deal with that and still be true to Brecht?
I think that it is a big misunderstanding of Brecht that he didn't want an audience to be moved. I think he absolutely did, and nobody could have written The Caucasian Chalk Circle or Mother Courage without wanting the audience to be moved. But what he didn't want was for the audience to have an emotional warm bath, to come out of it weeping tears, how very tragic, what a terrible life, how terrible, and let us now go home and live our lives in exactly the same way that we were always living them. I think he wanted people to be moved, but also to make them think, can we make the world a better place? I think that's what he was after.
Yeah. So he was trying to emphasise the decision-making rather than the audience thinking it was inevitable that was going to happen. He was emphasising the decisions, conscious decisions made by Mother Courage. Have you actually brought that out in the production?
Really, by trying to make her dilemmas as clear as possible, making sure that the pressures on her are as clear as possible, so that we absolutely understand why she's sometimes driven to do not exactly appalling things, but things that probably nice people wouldn't like to think they were capable of doing.
Now, he had a very close relationship with his designer, Brecht, because he had a distinct style with certain things like the curtains and the lighting, colours, but also his designer designed the arrangement of people on the stage. Have you gone with any of that with your designer? Do you have the same sort of relationship, you think?
Well, I've worked a lot with Judith Croft, who's designed Mother Courage, and so we have developed, I suppose, a kind of a language and a way of working. We will talk about that kind of thing, but not to the extent, particularly, that in the design process, the actual staging of scenes in terms of the placement of the actors will be gone through in detail. There are certain things you have to take into account when you're designing a play, like, for instance, there's a famous scene towards the end of Mother Courage where a character who must be at a certain height on the stage drums in order to warn a city that there's an impending surprise attack. So you have to make sure that you've got the right space, for instance, to deliver those moments. But I'm a great believer that actually a lot of really interesting ideas about staging come out in rehearsal. And that if a director, certainly in my style of working, if a director is too prescriptive at the beginning, for me it can stifle the life out of a play, and I'm more interested in creating an atmosphere where people feel free in rehearsal to, maybe try this or different and so on. And often I think the results there are more productive for me than if you come in with a very precise and, pre-imagined plan.
Well, finally then, to anybody who thinks, Brecht, that's serious, that's going to be a bit depressing, how would you sell the idea of them coming to see this play? How would you change the mind?
I think Mother Courage is one of the richest theatre experiences that you can have, because it's a wonderful story. I think Brecht is one of the great storytellers of the 20th century. The play, surprisingly for something with so dark themes, is shot through with humour. It has music, really interesting and gutsy songs. And I think that really it delivers a memorable theatre experience. And the last thing actually you get from it, I think, is didacticism, theory, political theory and all that kind of thing. It seems to me it's a play about human beings facing very, very difficult situations and often surmounting them brilliantly.
The spring has come and winter's dead. The snow has gone, so draw a breath. Let Christian souls crawl out of bed. Pull on your socks and conquer death.
the Library Theatre Company production of Mother Courage and Her Children by Bertolt Brecht, translated by Tony Kushner and directed by Chris Hohner, will be in the Lowry's Quays Theatre from the 22nd of February to the 9th of March. For more information and to book tickets, go to www.librarytheatre.com or www.thelowry.com. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.